Hello, my name is Naisha King, and today I'm going to be talking about religious imagery in Robert Matheson's I Am Legend in both the book and film adaptations. To begin, I'm going to talk about vampires throughout history. In the 18th century, vampires were first introduced into common literature, but also around this time, there were people were experiencing mass hysteria. They would go to graveyards and they would puncture the bodies of the undead in order to make sure they did not come back to life. And this mass hysteria and vampire ideology spread like wildfire through Eastern Europe. Vampires always represented something other. They were a different life force. They always represented a minority and an other type of group. Throughout historical novels, vampires are afraid of sunlight. They drink blood. They are afraid of the crucifix. Vampires have represented an antithesis to the church. They are like an anti-savior, an anti-messiah, because when they come back to life, to hurt people. As an antithesis to Christ, who comes back to save people. They drink blood and take life from people instead of redeeming blood, and they are not allowed in sacred holy spaces like churches. Vampires have always represented otherness and spirituality. However, zombies have represented the undead that is controlled by people. Vampires have sentience in their ability to speak, but zombies usually represent lifeless and reanimated bodies that cannot control their own actions. They're similar. They have been used throughout like other religions, non-Western religions such as voodooism, where zombies can be essentially just bodies brought back to life or puppets that are controlled by other forces. In the book, there is a lot of religious symbolism and imagery. One of the biggest examples of religious symbolism is the cursed resurrection of Virginia, Robert's wife. In this story, she dies and Robert buries her and expects her to stay buried, but when she comes back, she is not the same wife he remembers. She comes back coming to kill him and to hurt him, which is an antithesis to Christ coming back to save the world. When she comes back, he is forced to kill her again. But this is like an anti-religious imagery towards when Jesus resurrected from the dead, and the disciples and other people did not believe it. But just like that, he did not believe that his wife would return from the dead. He did not believe that she would, but instead of her saving him, she came back to hurt him as an antithesis of religion. At the end of the book, he is seen as a martyr, and martyrdom is usually seen as religious imagery or stand-in for Jesus. Robert Matheson has said that he never intended for this book to be spiritual. However, there are still a lot of spiritual and religious imagery. Robert has a cross tattooed on his chest from when he was young, and this cross, although he does not believe in God anymore, could potentially be one of the reasons that he is saved, besides the vampire that blood. He could also be under the constant protection of the cross. He prays in times of need and desperation, but he does not pray at any other times. He prays when he wants to save the dog because he is at his last resort. But he lives in a world of isolation, and he does not turn to religion at any point. The vampires in the novel follow vampire myths, and they are repelled by crucifixes. However, it's only Christian vampires that are repelled by crucifixes, and other vampires, like his neighbor, are repelled by the Torah since he is Jewish. This points to the fear of religious imagery because religious imagery can often represent fear. Religious imagery, for instance, from missionaries when they would go to colonize other countries, and they saw the cross, instead of representing something that seemed like salvation, it would represent terror, as they were afraid of what would happen to them at the hands of religion. At the end of the book, when Robert dies, he is seen as it's a sacrifice, but it is not a sacrifice towards the greater good, because the other vampires, the advanced vampires, see him as a problem. They see him as something to get rid of. And some articles have pointed to the fact that this represents the growing, how people are moving away from Christianity, and how atheism and religion were becoming more popular, and shows how Matheson predicted how atheism would win out in the end against religious groups, and how in the future that it would change and atheism would become much more popular than religion. And although this book is not explicitly Christian or any Western religion, it does have an element of spirituality, of the fact that even alone, he does not lose hope. He tries his best to maintain his humanity. However, he is not actually maintaining his humanity, because he is not doing anything to be alive. He is just doing monotonous motions, and so therefore he has no need for religion or sacrifice. The film adaptations of the book are a little different, and the religious imagery is much stronger in them. In The Last Man on Earth, which was made in 1954, Dr. Robert Morgan uses his blood as a cure, and this is similar to how how Christians use Jesus's blood during communion, and they drink red wine to symbolize his blood. This blood is supposed to cure humanity, and in Last Man on Earth, Robert is seen as better and separated from the vampires who are around him. When he dies at an altar. He is sacrificed. He is stabbed with a spear, and that is similar to how Jesus was stabbed with a spear on the cross. And there is a lot of imagery that points to the fact that in the movie, Robert is the savior. He is going to save. He is the last artifact of religion. He gets murdered because he is different, because he is something that the vampires are not. And this is similar to the fact that Christ was seen as a martyr. Christ was there to save, but in the book, there's very strong white saviorism, and Robert believes that he is going to cure the world, that he is the savior of it, and that the vampires, he denounces them completely, because how could they be right when they kill him, which has been said to symbolize religious persecution, and how Christians believe that they are being hunted by the other, how the other will wipe them out. In The Omega Man, there is also a lot of religious imagery, and the main character, Robert, is still seen as a Christ-like savior. His blood is supposed to cure not just Ruth, but his blood is supposed to cure all of humanity. There is an image of crucifixion where he is strung on a wheel by the family, and the family represents the dark side of religion, represents the cultish side of religion, and by refusing to join their cult, Robert stands strong, and he stands against the cult, and he refuses to join their cult as like a perverted version of religion. He stands as someone who is against their ideas. They say that some articles say that the family was based off of Charles Manson's family, and the Charles Manson trial came about a year or so before this movie was made. And so Charles Manson used religion as a way to control and hurt people. He used religion as a cult. And in this movie, the vampires and the family are using religion as a cult. They think that they are being saved. They think that their way is the better way, because they are now washed in a new life, in new salvation. And in I Am Legend is a little different, because the vampires are not seen as part of religion. The vampires are seen as purely anti-religious, as something to hunt and go after. In the The setting of I Am Legend is different than Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man because I Am Legend is set in New York, while Last Man on Earth and Omega Man are set in California. By setting it in New York after 9/11, the director completely changes the way that Dr. Neville is in I Am Legend, because setting it in a post 9/11 world with the vampires as ground zero almost gives off Islamophobia, because the vampires can be seen as domestic terrorists who are attacking this innocent Christian man, and the vampires can be seen as corrupt terrorists who are just so much other, because after 9/11 there was a lot of Islamophobia throughout the country, and the vampires, and in this movie the Dark Seekers are seen as other, but not like, they're not seen as anything to do with Christian imagery. They are seen instead as, because of the post 9/11 war, they are seen as Islamic terrorists. Throughout the movie, throughout I Am Legend, Anna has a really strong faith. Like, she believes in God, and she believes that she can hear God and that he is telling her all sorts of things. And it's interesting that she still believes in God, because she believes in the endurance of a God even after Robert points out that humanity has failed itself time and time again. She still believes in God, and he begins to also listen to God, and he decides that he is going to listen to her, and his cure is also going to save the world. So he's still seen as a savior. There's a Time magazine that shows that calls him the savior of humanity. And in the movie, he wrestles with the fact that the cure was supposed to save humanity, but it is his fault that everyone turned into night seekers. But I Am Legend still has strong savior imagery, however has less strong savior imagery as The Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man. When he hands the cure to Anna and sacrifices himself, he is still seen as a martyr. But when she accepts the cure and she goes to the Lost Colony, the first thing you see is a chapel, and it can represent salvation or heaven. And when she talks about driving away the darkness, when she says that in the last line of the movie, when she says that Dr. Neville drove away the darkness, he drove away the darkness that is perceived as the world and the worldly ways, and he points to a new salvation, a new hope, a new way of continuing life. All the film adaptations have really, really strong Jesus imagery, have a lot stronger religious imagery than in the book. And in the book, Robert is almost written as a villain because he is the monster. He's the antithesis to humanity. Like, he's the one who's destroying humanity in the vampires. However, in the movies, Robert is seen as always a hero, and he's never seen as the villain. He's seen as a hero and a savior and a Christ-like creature who is going to save the world of a terrible disease. However, this distracts from one of the points of the book, where that maybe the people who turned into vampires did not need to be saved. I think this also points to the fact that, like, in the book, you can see that the people like Ruth, do not necessarily need to be saved by Robert, and he's actually hurting them, which can represent the way that missionaries and other religious groups will come into other countries and they will force their religion onto them. But in the movies, you don't see as much as the forcing of religion onto the vampires or the forcing of religion onto anyone else. But in the book, that theme is more common, that you don't necessarily need to change their religion. But in the movie, it seems to all point toward Christ-like Western imagery. Thank you guys so much for listening.